My fishing rod was still leaning against the back wall of the garage. My reading glasses were still on the kitchen counter, folded next to the salt shaker. I had lived in that house for 19 years, and somehow, in 40 minutes, I had become a guest who forgot to take his things. I was 63 years old when my wife told me I needed to find somewhere else to stay. Not asked, told. She said it on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just come home from my annual physical, the one where my doctor told me my cholesterol was finally under control, finally after 2 years of watching what I ate. I walked in the front door feeling like something had gone right for once. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table with her daughter from her first marriage, and there was a stillness in the room that I recognized from years of working job sites. The kind of quiet right before something falls. Her daughter, she was 31 at the time, looked at her hands the entire conversation. My wife said her daughter needed to move back in. Her marriage had fallen apart. She had 2 kids, both under 6. She needed space and stability and help, and my wife wanted to give her that. All of that made sense to me. I understood it. We had a 4-bedroom house. There was room. What I did not understand was the next sentence. She said it would be easier if I stayed somewhere else for a while. I asked her what a while meant. She said he wasn't sure. I sat down in the chair across from her. I looked at her face, the face I had known for 16 years, and I tried to find something familiar in it. There was nothing. She had already made this decision before I walked through the door. The conversation was not a conversation. It was an announcement. Her daughter still hadn't looked up. I asked if she was serious. She said she knew it was a lot to ask. I said that wasn't what I asked. She said yes, she was serious. I have been in difficult situations before. I worked construction for 22 years before I moved into project management. I have been on sites when things went wrong, structural wrong, dangerous wrong. I know how to stay calm when everything in your body is telling you to panic, so I stayed calm. I asked 3 questions. I asked whose name was on the mortgage. Mine, both of ours, but mine was the primary. I asked if she had spoken to anyone, a lawyer, a counselor, anyone, before deciding this. She said she'd thought about it for a long time. I asked where exactly she expected me to go. She suggested a hotel, or I could ask my brother. She said it with the same tone you use when you're suggesting a restaurant. I stood up. I walked to the bedroom. I packed 1 bag. Clothes for a week, my medications, my phone charger, the folder with my insurance cards and social security card that I kept in the nightstand drawer. I had learned long ago to know where that folder was at all times. Old habit. Turns out it was a good one. I walked back through the kitchen. Her daughter was crying quietly. My wife was standing at the sink with her back to me. I said I would be in touch. She didn't turn around. I got into my truck and sat there for about 4 minutes before I started the engine. The fishing rod was still in the garage. My reading glasses were still on the counter. I left them there because I didn't trust myself to go back inside. I called my brother from the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel about 12 miles from the house. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Come here. Right now. Don't go to a hotel." I drove to his place. He had a spare room that smelled like cedar and old paint. He put clean sheets on the bed and didn't ask me any questions that night. We sat on his porch and he handed me a beer and we watched the road, and that was enough. The next morning, I called the family law attorney before 8 o'clock. I want to be clear about that because I have heard stories, maybe you have too, about men who wait, who hope, who let weeks go by thinking that something will shift, that the person they married will come back around. I understand that impulse. I felt it in my chest that first night, lying in my brother's spare room, listening to the ceiling fan spin. I felt it, but I did not follow it. The attorney's name was not someone I knew socially. I had found him the year before for an unrelated business matter, a contractor dispute, and I remembered he was direct and didn't waste words. His office called back at 8:47. I had an appointment for that afternoon. He asked me a series of questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. What state my accounts were in, whether we had a joint checking, a joint savings, whether I was still receiving direct deposit, whether there were any outstanding loans in both names, whether I had contributed to the down payment on the house. I answered all of them. He said the first thing I needed to do that day before 5 o'clock was go to our bank and separate what I legally could, not to take what wasn't mine, but to protect what was. I did that at 2 in the afternoon. I spoke with a banker I had dealt with before, explained the situation plainly, and I moved my direct deposit to a new individual account. I left half of the joint savings untouched because my attorney said to, "You don't take what isn't yours, but you protect what is." I called my wife that evening to tell her I had done it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said I didn't have to be dramatic about it. I said I was being practical. She said we could talk when things settled down. I said I was ready to talk now and that she should think about whether she wanted to work this out with a mediator or go straight to the legal process. I wasn't angry when I said it. I was just clear. I had spent one night grieving. I didn't have the energy or the years left to spend more than that waiting. She said she needed time. I said I understood and that I'd be in touch through my attorney. She had not expected that. I think she had expected the version of me that had spent 22 years keeping my head down on job sites and never raising my voice and working through things quietly. That version of me was real, but that version of me also knew when a foundation was cracked and the building needed to come down. The divorce took 9 months. The house was eventually sold. We split the proceeds. It was not generous and it was not vicious. It was paperwork and signatures and a lot of waiting in rooms with bad lighting. I rented a small place, 2 bedrooms, a covered carport, a yard with one oak tree in it, and I started the part of my life I had not planned for. I was 63. My knees hurt in the mornings. I had a coffee maker and a sleeping bag and 3 boxes of books and not much else. My brother came over the first Saturday and helped me put together a bed frame. My son, from my first marriage, a man who was 35 by then and had his own family, drove 4 hours and helped me move the boxes in. He didn't say much about his stepmother. He just showed up. That mattered more than I knew how to say. The first year was the hardest thing I had done since my first wife passed. Not in the same way. Nothing is in the same way. But hard. The evenings especially. There is a particular kind of quiet in a place where no one else lives, and at 63 it is not the same quiet as when you're 30 and between apartments. It has a different weight to it. I took up things to fill the hours. I finished the kitchen table I'd been meaning to build for 6 years. I started walking 3 miles every morning. Not because a doctor told me to, though one had, but because I needed somewhere to put my body while my head sorted itself out. I read more than I had in years. History mostly. Men who had lost things and rebuilt anyway. I kept working. Project management had been good to me and I was good at it. I took on 2 new clients that fall. I focused on the parts of the job I had always liked. The problem solving, the logistics. The satisfaction of watching something go from a plan on paper to a real structure that people would use. Work, I discovered, was not a cure, but it was a container. Something to pour the days into so they didn't just pour on the floor. My wife and I had no contact after the divorce was finalized. Her daughter moved in, then moved out, then moved in again with a different man. I heard this secondhand through my son, who had heard it from someone else. I didn't ask for updates and I didn't look for them. I had enough to do. 3 years in, something shifted. It happened slowly, the way most real things do. I stopped waking up at night with the grinding feeling in my chest. I stopped doing the calculation, the one where you subtract the year you got divorced from the year you die, approximately, and think about what that number means. I stopped doing that math because I had stopped caring about the answer in the way I used to. I took a project in the spring that required me to travel to a job site in Western Tennessee. It was a commercial development, a small medical complex, nothing dramatic. But the contractor on site was sharp, and the work was interesting, and I ended up staying 3 weeks instead of 2. I ate at the same diner almost every morning. There was a woman who worked there, a few years younger than me, recently widowed, born and raised in that town, and we talked most mornings over coffee. About nothing in particular, the weather, the construction next door, a book she was reading. I did not fall in love at that diner. That is not what happened. What happened was simpler. I remembered that I was capable of having a normal conversation with a person who had no reason to be kind to me except that she chose to be. That is a small thing, but when you have forgotten it, it is not small at all. When the project ended and I drove home, I had her number in my phone. We talked on the phone twice a week for about 3 months. Then I drove back to Tennessee. Then she came to see where I lived. It took another year before we talked seriously about what we were doing. I was 66 by then. She was 61. We were both old enough to know that time does not give refunds. I had been managing a moderately successful construction consulting business for 2 years by then, just myself and two part-time contractors I trusted, and it was doing well enough that I had started turning down work I didn't want. That is a good position to be in. It took me 40 years to understand that turning down work you don't want is not laziness. It's the point. I had a website, nothing elaborate, just a business name, a short description, a contact form. I had set it up at my son's insistence. He said it looked more legitimate than just a phone number. He was right. That was how she found me. My ex-wife, I mean. I don't know how long she searched. I don't know what she typed, or what she was looking for, or what she expected to find. What she found was my business website, my name, a photograph of me on a completed job site, smiling, in a hard hat, looking like a man who had somewhere to be. She sent an email to the contact form. She said she had been thinking about me. She said things had been difficult. She said her daughter's situation had not turned out the way she had hoped. More problems, another man who wasn't right, the grandchildren dealing with things children shouldn't have to deal with. She said she was sorry for how things had ended. She said she missed what we had. She said she thought we had made a mistake. I read the email twice. I closed my laptop and I made a cup of coffee and I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the oak tree in the backyard for a while. I thought about the Tuesday she didn't turn around. I thought about the hotel she suggested like she was recommending a restaurant. I thought about her daughter crying quietly at the table and how neither of them ever called me afterward to see where I had gone that night. I thought about the fishing rod I had left in the garage. She had sold the house too eventually. That rod was gone now. It was a good rod. I went back to the laptop. I reread the email one more time. Then I closed it and left it unanswered. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. I am not a man who believes in cruelty for its own sake. But there is a difference between cruelty and clarity, and I had learned at some cost to know which one I was practicing. She had made a decision, a clear, deliberate, premeditated decision, one she had thought about for a long time by her own admission. She had made it without me. She had the right to do that. And I had the right to make my own decisions with equal deliberateness. My decision was that I was done. That fall, I drove back to Tennessee. I had a project down there, a small renovation on a community health center, and I stayed a little longer than the project required. We went to a county fair on a Saturday evening. She laughed at something I said. It was a real laugh, the kind that catches you off guard and sounds like a person, not a performance. We got engaged the following spring. My son flew in for the weekend, we told his family. He shook my hand, then he pulled me into a hug, and he didn't say anything for a moment. When he stepped back, he said, "You look like yourself again." I didn't know, until he said it, how much I had needed someone to say that. We had a small wedding, 40 people maybe. Outdoor ceremony, late afternoon light, a reception in a barn that had been converted for exactly that kind of thing. I wore a new suit. She wore a dress the color of cream, and she looked like a woman who had made a decision she was certain about, which is the only kind of woman I had any interest in. My brother gave a toast. He kept it short. He said I was the most stubborn man he had ever known, and that had finally worked out in my favor. He wasn't wrong. I am 68 now. My knees still hurt in the mornings. My cholesterol is still under control. I have a partner who reads in the evenings and makes coffee too strong and tells me exactly what she thinks, which I have come to understand is not a flaw. The fishing rod is gone. I bought a new one. It is not the same as the old one, but it works, and last April I caught the largest bass I have caught in 30 years with it, which seems like a reasonable trade. My ex-wife never reached out again after the email. I hope she found her way through whatever she was dealing with. I mean that without reservation. I also mean it without regret. At 63, I thought I was standing in the wreckage of the last good chapter. I thought the story I had imagined for myself, the one with a partner, a home, something that felt like peace, was over. It was not over. It was just being written by someone I hadn't met yet. The fishing rod I left in that garage was worth maybe $40. I have thought about it more than I should. Not because of the money, because of what it meant to leave something behind and not go back for it, to decide, in a parking lot at 63 years old, that some things are simply gone now, and the only direction worth moving is forward. I did not handle everything perfectly in those first weeks. I want to be honest about that. There were nights in my brother's spare room where I lay awake and ran the same conversation through my head on a loop, looking for the sentence I could have said differently, the moment I could have turned it around. That is a natural thing to do. It is also a useless one. What I eventually learned, and it took longer than I'd like to admit, is that replaying a decision someone else made does not change it. It only keeps you standing in their kitchen long after you've already left. What pulled me out of that loop was not wisdom. It was practicality. The attorney's office at 8:47 in the morning, the banker I'd dealt with before, the folder of documents I'd kept in the nightstand drawer out of old habit. I had not planned for any of this, but I had, without knowing it, been a person who kept his affairs in order. That mattered. Being clear-headed about money and legal standing when everything else is a wreck is not cold. It is how you survive long enough to feel something again. There is something I believe now that I did not have the language for at 63. The way a situation resolves itself has a great deal to do with how honestly you assessed it to begin with. My wife had made a decision, a clear one by her own admission. She had thought about it for a long time. The honest response to a clear decision is to treat it as one, not to negotiate around it, not to wait it out, but to make your own clear decision in return. I did that. It cost me a year of hard living and a lot of quiet evenings. What it gave me back was a life I actually recognized as mine. I think about my son showing up with his truck to help me move boxes. 4 hours of driving, no complaint, no commentary about his stepmother. Just presence. That is what decency looks like in practice. Not speeches, not gestures, just showing up and doing the thing. I have tried to live that way for most of my life, and I have not always managed it, but I have tried. It turns out that trying, consistently and over years, tends to produce something. It produces a son who drives 4 hours. It produces a brother who puts clean sheets on the bed without asking questions. It produces a woman in Tennessee who laughs a real laugh and means it. The email from my ex-wife sat in my inbox for 3 days before I made my decision. I am not proud of the 3 days, but I am not ashamed of the decision. Closing that email was not revenge. It was the last honest thing I owed the situation, which was to be clear about what I wanted and what I did not. I had learned at considerable cost that clarity given early saves everyone a great deal of suffering later. She had been clear on a Tuesday. I was clear in an email inbox 5 years on. We were finally, in the most unfortunate way, on the same page. I am 68. The oak tree in my backyard is doing well. I caught a large bass last April with a rod that is not the one I left behind, and it was enough. Most things I have found are enough. Once you stop measuring them against what you lost and start measuring them against what you actually need,